Bitcoin is close to becoming worthless.
Let's go. Now, what's the Bitcoin?
Bitcoin's like rat poison.
Yeah. Oh,
The greatest scam in history.
let's get it.
Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Today's episode is with Matt Hill from Start9. I thought it was about time to get him on the show. I've been running one of these Start9s on an old laptop for probably about 6 months now. I've been really impressed and I wanted to dive into a little bit more detail about how it started and where they're going. It was really good to chat to Matt, and we'll be getting something else booked in very soon. I want to say thank you to everyone who boosted the last show with Max Tannehill. It's really great to know you're enjoying the content. I love reading the messages, and of course, I love the tasty sats. We're going to jump into the boost now, but I also want to say thank you to Chad Farrow, who has been streaming a significant amount of sats to the last few episodes. I appreciate you, mate. Now I'm going to read the top 10 boosts from last episode. User 85445,985, 101,000 sats. Max T is absolutely right. Samurai left behind an incredible community with a clear view of where the line in the sand is drawn. Linkin Park rules. Never heard of him. I've been selfishly waiting for this one for ages. Max Tannehill is criminally underfollowed on Twitter. Maybe it's that pesky shadow ban at work. But he always delivers with insightful takes rooted in both rationality and his wealth of experience in the cryptocurrency space. Hopefully this episode can impact some people that haven't heard Max before. Late Stage Hodl, 33,000 sats. Donkey work? Well, that's a first for me. Was concerned to Google that. John, 21,000 sats. Root Goldberg machine, drink. And if you're out of drink, have fun staying poor whiskey on the Ungovernable Misfits store. Thanks for the show, mate. 8 Mithrandir. Max, got them sick Singapore P2P hookups. Jealous as fuck. Bubba, bored? How can that be? Could be that, like me, you think the mission of Bitcoin has been compromised. Mass adoption by limp dick faggots crying for government approval, hence permission. I ain't bored, I came for Bitcoin. I might leave because of Bitcoiners. Expatriotic. Oh, got your coffee cup there? Mr. Dear listener, run your own node. This is very important. Much more important than liking my post with more than 10 sats. Please do not like this boost unless you have/want your own node. Message ends. And finally, FOMO Matronic with no message. Right, that was the top 10. Thank you to everyone who's boosted, everyone who supported the show, sent in messages, shared with friends and family, and everything else you're all doing. I appreciate it. Before we start the show, I want to say a quick thank you to Foundation Devices. They make my favourite hardware. They have an incredible team. And if you aren't already using one of these things, you've got to question what the fuck you're doing in life. They're beautifully designed. They're fully open source. They have the best team in the Bitcoin world, including our good friend Bitcoin Q&A. Any fuckwit can use these. I've proven that. I use it literally every day at the moment. You can use it with their companion app, which is incredibly slick, makes labeling very easy. If you care about keeping your Bitcoin secure, you care about open source, and you don't want to be using some horrible piece of shit with a disgusting UX, check out Foundation Devices at foundationdevices.xyz. And if you want some money off, you can use the code Ungovernable. If anyone has any questions, you can reach out to me. I'll answer in any way I can. but I work with these guys because I love what they do, and I think you will do too. Enjoy the show. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So this is not video, is that correct?
Yeah, not video. We
Okay.
try and keep our privacy.
All good. Great.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me. I thought it was about time I get you on because me and Q&A and everyone else who's involved in this show have been talking about Start9 a lot recently. We do a monthly show covering all the updates on things, and this is what we're running most of the time for most of the things that we do. Big step up from what I've had previously, just in terms of usability. It's been bulletproof ever since I started running it. So, yeah, congrats, mate. It's fucking cool.
Thank you. It's really funny you say that too, because how do I put this? We have such high standards for what we're building that because we want it to work, right? Like long term and in a big way. We're serious about the idea of many people, maybe not everyone, but most people or most families at least having a server in the future. In order for that to happen, it needs to be, as you mentioned, bulletproof, and it needs to be really simple as well. And it needs to be very extensible. It needs to scale to accommodate all the various different applications that somebody might want to run now and in the future. And so while what we currently have is 0351 is our latest version of StartOS, and we are officially still in beta, very much so. We made the determination about a year ago that we got the architecture wrong of the current version that you are using and praising, which I appreciate. We determined that it wasn't the proper foundation that would enable us to achieve our long-term goals. And so we set out to rewrite it for the fourth time. and
Okay.
and that rewrite is now nearly complete. So I smile because we do get a lot of positive feedback on the current product. And then we look at each other and we go, well, we just trashed it. We rewrote the entire thing. Nothing survived. We rewrote it from first principles in order to fix all the problems that we see with it. Maybe not on a daily basis that somebody would notice, but in our imagining of where it's going, right? Because I know where we're going. You might not. A lot of people might not. And the current OS will not take us there. So we rewrote it, and it's almost ready. It's in alpha testing, actually, the new rewrite. Very exciting.
What was it that you weren't happy with? Even though I'm singing the praises, I am one of the most technically inept people in the Bitcoin world, which is why Q&A helps and holds my hand, and lots of smart people jump on the show to help me through things. But in my mind, at least, when I compare this, I think I've run and built every single node package out there, and usually it's me, a bottle of whiskey, a weekend, a lot of swearing and calling people and trying to sort things out, followed by finally getting it sorted, and then every few months, everything failing and me throwing my toys out the pram. That's been my experience for the last 6 or so years. For me, it's fucking amazing because I built this thing in and set it all up on a laptop in like, I don't know, a couple of hours. No dramas, no swearing, no stress, and it's been rock solid and stable, running not just my Bitcoin stuff, my Lightning stuff, everything else. So for me, it's great, but why is it not great for you or not good enough for you?
Yeah, that's so great to hear. I love the feedback. Well, so unfortunately, it gets a little technical, but I can keep that part thin and talk about the meaning, right? Sort of at a higher level. So let's start there. And if you have deeper questions, we can dive in. So first and foremost, our networking stack was too rigid. And I bet if you had a complaint, which you have not stated one yet, but I bet if you had one, it would probably be the lack of networking options in terms of connecting to the server while you're away from home, which currently is Tor only. Right? That is how you connect to your server while away from it, is using the various tor.onion URLs that every service interface and the operating system itself receive. And Tor is slow and unreliable. It was a great place for us to start because it had NAT punching built in, meaning the user does not need to set up any kind of configurations on their router. They can just plug this server in, go to the other side of the world, and access it securely and privately using the Tor URLs without any additional setup or trade-offs. It's just great. The trade-off of that is the slow, unreliable nature of Tor in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've known for a long time that this was not going to, as I mentioned, scale to everyone. Right? Not everyone is going to open up the Tor browser and put up with spinners. Not everyone is going to run Tor on their laptop or run Orbot on their iOS or Android device. This is like niche stuff. This is techie, geeky stuff. Even though it's achievable, it's still not what we're going for. And so as we talked through how to add more networking options, we realized that we had made a mistake in the current architecture of StartOS, which is that we thought it was really neat, clever, to host every service interface on a unique .local URL. Just like every service interface gets a unique .onion URL, right, which is a public key .onion. We said, well, why don't we just reuse that same public key and spin up a .local URL for that service? That way, if somebody's home, they can use .locals, and when they're away, they can use .onions. And this was very simple. It was a very simple paradigm, and it was very clever because in order to do these unique .locals, we had to use a technology called Avahi, and more specifically, it's Avahi aliasing. What that means is that it's utilizing MDNS, multicast DNS, on the local area network, and every service is actually the main.local, right? Your server has a main.local that's a adjective, noun, right? Word, .local. Well, all the unique .locals that you see for all your services are actually just aliases of that primary .local. And then under the hood, we are resolving DNS. So we're saying, oh, okay, they came in from this pubkey.local URL. That's going to map to this internal service interface. And essentially, we're running our own DNS server in StartOS and using this aliasing to achieve it. And we were proud of ourselves. We thought we were really clever. What we didn't realize is that Avahi is an ancient pile of trash that is no longer maintained. And so it's just buggy, right? It's an open source project that is barely maintained. We certainly do not have the resources to go in there and take over the project. And so we found out kind of too late that there's bugs associated with this, and we had to hack around them. So it works pretty well on StartOS, but that's because we had to build up a lot of hacks to make it work, to accommodate the shortcomings of Avahi. And secondly, for Windows users, anyone with a Windows laptop, this doesn't work out of the box. They have to install something called Bonjour print services onto their machine in order to make this work, which is annoying and kind of a letdown when these people discover that, they have to do even more configuration on their client device.
It sounds shit as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's
Bonjour
like, why are you
something.
installing Bonjour print services to make, just to reach my URL? It's weird.
Yeah.
And it's introducing yet another, third-party piece of software. I mean, it's all open source stuff, but still, it's like you don't want to be cluttering what should be a very simple experience with a bunch of extra dependencies. And the biggest problem is not everything I just mentioned. The biggest problem is actually that by doing it this way, services on the LAN, so, I want to clarify one term. I keep saying the term service interfaces. And I want everyone to know what I mean when I say that. When you install Bitcoin, you are installing a service. But Bitcoin has multiple interfaces through which you can access Bitcoin. One is the RPC interface. This is what the client wallets use. There's the P2P interface. This is what other nodes on the network use. And then you have a ZMQ interface, which is what the dependents of Bitcoin use, like LND. And in theory, you could imagine a user interface for Bitcoin where you could visualize statistics about your node, its peers, and stuff like that. We don't have one, but you could imagine a future where somebody slaps a user interface onto the Bitcoin node just to see what's going on with your node in a very visual way. And so when I say service interfaces, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all the various ways that a service exposes itself to either the internet or a local net to be used by you or another service or a peer. And so each of those gets its own .local, right? Every single service interface. It's not like Bitcoin has an address. Bitcoin has 3 .onion URLs on StartOS, each being the different interfaces that I just mentioned. By using the .locals on the LAN, these service interfaces did not get their own ports, which is a much more common approach to networking, right? You would expect an IP address or a .local address with a port after it, a unique port that would map to that service interface. And we didn't do that because we had this clever little .local scheme. Again, the mistake here was the oversight of, well, what happens when you want to use a VPN to connect to your home to access your Bitcoin RPC interface? Well, it turns out, and we didn't know this at the time either, that VPNs do not support Avahi and .local aliasing. So now if you were to go get your, turn on your VPN, whichever, one you use, and plug in a blah, blah, blah .local URL, it's just going to throw up. It's not going to work. And so we effectively disabled inadvertently VPN access to StartOS services by doing this Avahi aliasing. That's long-winded enough. You can understand why this is a problem. When we set out to fix it, we began thinking about all the other ways that we had made mistakes. We were like, okay, well, clearly we're not perfect and we get things wrong. So let's really think this through. Like let's reevaluate the way we do networking in general. And what we found was that we had created a relatively rigid system. Every service gets a .onion URL. Every service gets a .local URL. Sorry, every service interface gets one of these URLs. So we said, okay, we're going to get rid of the .locals and we're going to switch to ports. So now every service will get a .onion and every service interface will get a unique port. But what happens if someone wants to use I2P to connect to their service interface? Or what if they want to use some peer-to-peer technology like Hole Punch or something like that to connect? Or what if something new comes out, right? They want to use Nostr to, send a special note that, indicates speaking to a service on your LAN. What if they want to use a VPN? What if they want to use ClearNet? They want to host their blog on a ClearNet domain. We realized that we not only weren't we covering all the currently available options, but we definitely were not building a system that could accommodate all future unknown forms of networking as well. And so we wanted to build a much more general, configurable, flexible networking stack where, for instance, a user could not have a Tor URL if they don't want one, right? Like, why do we force users to have a .onion URL for all their service interfaces? We shouldn't. That should be user choice. In fact, when you install a service for the first time, this is the conclusion we ultimately came to, it shouldn't have any addresses because we cannot pre-assume what you are going to want. Take Nextcloud, for instance. Or here's a good one, Synapse. You're familiar with Synapse and the Matrix protocol and network?
It's not something I use, but yeah, I know what it is.
So Synapse, like some federated networks, your server URL is part of your network ID and username, right? So you don't just, it's not like if we're using Signal or Telegram and you say, oh, here's my handle. It's, at Matt Hill or something. When it comes to Matrix, you have to say, oh, here's my handle. It's Matt Hill at blah, blah, blah .onion, right? It's more like an email address. It's more like, because the server, the location of the server matters in these federated networks. And so you only get one. You can't change it, right? It's not like Bitcoin RPC, where the Bitcoin RPC could be hosted on 5 different network interfaces. Like, I could put my Bitcoin RPC on 2 different .onion URLs, a unique port on the LAN, a .local URL. I could put it on a ClearNet domain, bitcoin.matthill.dev, and the wallets would respect all of them equally. right? I could plug in my .onion to a wallet that supports Tor. I could plug in my IP and port to a wallet with a VPN enabled on the device, or I could plug in my ClearNet domain to a wallet and not need to do any kind of client-side network configurations. And Bitcoin doesn't care. It's like if your house is located somewhere and you're going to give somebody the directions to your house, you could arrive at that house many different ways. I could tell you to take the highway and then go left, left, right. Or I could tell you to take the back roads and go right, 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 right. And it's like there's many different ways to reach my house, but my house doesn't care how you got there. My house has no knowledge of these routes. That's how you can think of Bitcoin's RPC. Bitcoin RPC is like, hey, if I receive a signal, I don't care where it came from. I don't even need to know where it came from. As long as it reached me, I must assume that it is valid traffic. Sure, I might check authentication, make sure the password is correct before I give you a response, but I don't care how you got here. And that's these different addresses. But when you talk about something like Synapse, Matrix, it does care, right? There is a very specific route that you must take to get to the server. And so if we as a company, Start9, and as a development team decide sort of a priori before the user even expresses their desire or intent, if we just assign them a .onion URL for their Synapse server, well, then we have condemned them to only being able to use their Synapse server on Tor, which isolates them from 99% of the world's population who is not going to be using Synapse on Tor. And so what we realized was that the networking experience we want is for somebody to download and install a service and then choose how they want that service to be exposed to these various networks, either the public internet, a private intranet, VPN access, the Tor network, I2P network. They get to choose. It's user choice. And so that's what we designed, is we redesigned the entire networking stack to be infinitely extensible, totally customizable, putting the user in control of how the service is exposed to the world, and in a way that is intuitive and with, sane defaults. Like if you don't know what you're doing, or, we can sort of present you with what we think you want to do, and then you can just hit OK. So that's one major rework of StartOS that's coming, is this total overhaul of the entire networking stack for the purpose of extensibility and flexibility and user control.
It makes total sense. I mean, if you're saying a server in every home, for me at least, it's fine, like doing everything over Tor, even though it seems stupid because I'm like sat here next to my node and then I'm connecting over Tor. It feels a bit silly, but it doesn't really matter because nothing that I'm doing is that time sensitive. It's like, okay, I want to send a payment, I'm connecting to it over Sparrow, I'm sending a payment. If Tor's being a bit buggy or glitchy, it's not the end of the world. But if people are uploading photos or keeping their chats on there or doing any of the other stuff that you might want to do with a server, I can imagine Tor would be a major issue. A lot of friends of mine are using things like Tailscale to connect to their nodes. And from what you've just said, I'd imagine you couldn't do that as it currently stands.
That's correct. Yeah, that's one of the big, and really only, to be honest, complaints, the recurring complaints that we get is this remote connectivity limitation. But the new architecture not only allows for Tailscale, but wait till you see what we got coming. I mean, we have networking options that not only do what Tailscale does, but do it without a trusted third party, which Tailscale is. And then secondly, we have ClearNet capabilities. StartOS itself will have WireGuard capabilities so that you can not only connect to your server privately using a VPN, but you could also host services on your server on a ClearNet IP or domain without exposing your home's IP address. So there's going to be these tiers of choices with trade-offs. And half of our battle is documentation, of course, and making sure that we don't set defaults that have unexpected trade-offs, but really messaging to the user, okay, by default, your service can't be reached, period. Like it's useless. And if you're a super, if privacy, censorship resistance, anonymity are most important to you, well, you should just toggle, the .onion on and use that and deal. And the trade-off there is this user experience. But the next best thing, if it's for you accessing your server, would be to use this VPN strategy. And here's a guide for how to do that. And all of it, again, is built into StartOS. Might require you to do some configurations on a client device. Might even require you to spin up a VPS somewhere that has a static public IP address for the sake of reverse tunneling, for lack of a better term, such that when somebody visits your public IP address, they're actually reaching your home server, but without knowing the IP address of your home, which is a clever thing that you can do with WireGuard and is effectively what Tailscale does, except Tailscale is a VLAN setup. It's not hosted on the public internet. It's only for your private access. But we will have Tailscale on the marketplace. I'm aware of somebody packaging it for 036. We will have this really cool thing called Static Wire available on the marketplace. Static Wire is a way to lease public IPv4 addresses over Lightning Network anonymously for varying periods of time. So for instance, you would install Static Wire, select how long you want an IPv4 address for, you say a month. An invoice will be presented. You'll click pay because LND will be a dependency of this service. So you won't need to actually, open a wallet or anything. You'll just fund it right from the LND node running on your server. And then this service will provision you an IPv4 address such that if anyone visits that IPv4 address and a particular port, or visits your domain that you have now, mapped to that IP address, then anyone in the world would be able to access the services that you choose to expose. So if you want to host your blog from your home or something like that, you can do so without exposing your home IP, using an IP address that you rented anonymously using Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. And this is like super drop dead easy, user friendly to do. Now you are introducing this third party, this business that is renting you this IP address for a period of time, but they don't know much about you at all. They will know your home IP address, and that's effectively what they will know. They will not be able to see, introspect the traffic. It's all encrypted going through their server, but it's a third party. And so we will have to message that. We're going to say, hey, you're going to rent this IP address from, we are not doing this. This is somebody else who spun this up and built this technology. And they're going to know, your home IP address. And that's it. Other than that, they're just a node, basically. They're a relay. They function as a relay.
Is there a way around that? And the reason I'm wondering is when I think about using Lightning, I only ever spend from my own Lightning stuff. Like I won't receive because of privacy concerns. I don't want to leak any information, so I'll only fund my Lightning channel. I run C Lightning on my Start9. I'm pretty happy with it. It's pretty good. And then I'll fund with Postmix, and then I'll only spend. But someone was saying to me recently, there's a way around this where you can get an invoice paid and then it does a couple of hops from that point to where you are. Is there any trickery that could be done with Start9 where I could effectively run like a separate wallet or separate service where I could receive rather than having to do this weird like Rube Goldberg machine situation that I'm currently doing?
I don't know because I'm not familiar with the strategy that you just relayed to me about, some multi-hop thing. I don't know if that's unique to CLN or Lightning or if I just don't know. I'm not familiar with that. But I will say that being private, so there's a lot of chatter about IP addresses in the world, right? And for good reason, but also it's important, I think, to address reality for real, right? To not have some sort of fantasy about how the internet currently works and how imprivate it really is. It is very, very difficult to not expose your home IP address or your phone's IP address or whatever you're doing, right? Like using a VPN is inadequate depending on your threat model, who you're trying to be private from. Okay. So for instance, let's say I'm using my computer at home to do internet things. Okay. My IP address is being blasted all over the place. I mean, people don't necessarily realize this. They seem like surprised when they find out there was like this kind of uproar around Umbrel a while back where, Umbrel is pinging their server every, I don't know what it was, like 30 seconds to check for updates. And that this request to Umbrel's servers was being made using a standard internet request, right? It's just like, my computer or my server pings your server and says, are there updates available? This is like very, very standard normal stuff. And the controversy was, well, Umbrel knows your IP address. And they seemed a little sort of taken aback by this. And they're like, well, of course. Like how, you know what I mean? Like everyone knows your IP address. Like every single website you visit, it's made using the same internet protocol. And your IP address is being blasted all over the world 24/7, 365. Like your IP address is not a private thing. It's a public thing. To keep it private requires extraordinary efforts. And as I mentioned, using a VPN is inadequate to a degree because, one, it must always be running. If that thing is off for even a second, you've just leaked your IP all over the place without knowing it.
Yeah.
Number two is instead of blasting your IP address to 20 different websites that you're visiting, what you're doing is you're blasting your IP address to one party, namely the VPN provider, and telling them the 20 different sites that you visited. So you're actually consolidating your internet activity into the hands of a single party.
Yeah, you're putting all your trust in one company.
Well, correct. Yeah. So if you're a state actor and you're interested in somebody and you know that they are a privacy advocate using a VPN service, you're almost like, oh, thank God, because you just have to go to that one person, that one VPN provider and be like, tell me everything about this person, everything. And they know everything. Yeah. Whereas if you don't use a VPN, then they would have to go to every single place that you visit. They'd have to go to Facebook. They'd have to go to Google. They'd have to go to all these different places, which they can do, but it's just a lot more work to create this profile of your internet activity. So using a VPN is a good strategy if you are trying to obfuscate your IP address from the various places that you go on the internet. But it is a bad strategy if you are trying to obfuscate your internet activity from a state actor. So it really just depends on your threat model.
Theoretically, they can go to anyone and find out who you are. I suppose the only way around that, and like you said, this gets into the weeds a bit, but it's like you could pay for a VPN service via Lightning. You could do things to obfuscate who you are, and you could run a router level VPN and then that connect to a second VPN. You can do these things, which I do, and I've probably made mistakes. So like I'm not doing it thinking like, oh, fucking hell, the government isn't going to know who I am because I'm really boring. I do these things because I'm just trying my best. And I'm trying, especially being involved in Bitcoin, it's like, you don't want to like be talking about this stuff because everyone thinks you're a weirdo and like, you know, it's just like best practice. But I totally get what you mean. And I think people overstate what they're capable of or think that they're kind of like some secret squirrel spy when actually it would be relatively easy to find out who they are. But anything that makes it more simple for more people, in my eyes, is a good thing, especially around Bitcoin. You know, there's a lot of loudmouths on Bitcoin Twitter saying things they shouldn't probably be saying. And if people are even close to being correct about where this thing goes in the future, you know, they could be in some danger.
Yes. And there are strategies, as you mentioned, that, you know, are effective. Using multiple VPNs in different jurisdictions, meaning each VPN you're using is under the purview of a different state authority, is a very effective way to maintain your privacy because what it requires is cooperation between the two jurisdictions. So that is a very, very effective way to, you know, not have anyone know what you're doing on the internet because neither VPN provider has that picture. They would have to talk to each other to get it. That is definitely a way. Tor is also a good way, except Tor is only really provably effective if you are visiting hidden service URLs, .onion URLs. If you are using Tor to visit ClearNet URLs, .com, .net, there's a very good argument to be made that that is not effective, that the exit nodes necessary to complete that transaction are compromised.
Yeah, it would make sense that they would be.
Yeah, as far as we know, though, so long as you are using Tor to do Tor and you're not leaving the Tor network, that there's no exit node involved, that it should be safe unless you're unlucky and got, a series of relay nodes that are all owned and operated by the same bad actor, which could also be the case. But anyway, so should I go back into a little bit more of what the new OS fixes? I mean, we talked about networking, why it's important, how it relates to privacy.
Yeah, definitely. Before we do, I just have one more sort of nerdy question on this stuff before we jump into that. What are your thoughts on running multiple start nines for different things? For example, would you have any concerns with someone, let's just say they play with all the toys that you guys offer, they download every single option and they've got all the Bitcoin stuff and they're storing their photos on there and they're doing their chats on there and they're doing everything else. Is there any concern that you'd have by having effectively all your eggs in one basket? Or is the new architecture built in such a way that it partitions things out and it wouldn't be a worry? If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense and is something we get asked a lot. Our very strong and an official stance on this is that you should partition services amongst different servers based on how critical their failure would be to your life, how devastating an attack or failure would be. So, for instance, the naive approach to this, and what a lot of people say, and I've refuted this on multiple occasions, is, run your Bitcoin stuff on one server and your other stuff on another. And I think that is a very arbitrary line to draw. The reason people draw it is because Bitcoin stuff, what they really mean is financial, right? Private keys. They're talking about stuff you don't want to lose on one server and stuff you wouldn't mind losing on another server. And that is a much more accurate way to phrase it, which means it doesn't need to be Bitcoin and non-Bitcoin. It's just, if you have something that's really, really important, let's say you're running a massive, powerful Lightning routing node, okay? There shouldn't be anything else on that server. There should be Bitcoin and either CLN or LND. That's it. Don't install anything else. Maybe you could have something like RTL or ThunderHub installed so that you could manage that node, right? And do the things you need to do. But you want the bare minimum number of services possible. The reason for this is because every single service introduces another entry point to your server. It is, it's like putting another door in your house. You have to secure that door. And with services, updates are always a danger. So if you have 20 services on your server and any one of them gets compromised at any time and you update to it, then you could lose the whole system. Updates are very, risky. You should do them carefully. We recommend waiting, oftentimes weeks or even months after a new service has been released before updating, to let other people update first and let the community test and maybe discover any bugs. And the more important the things on your server are, the more diligent you should be about what software gets installed onto that server, including updates from StartOS, right? If Start9 puts out a new update to StartOS, you should think hard before clicking the update button. It is open source code. It is increasingly being used by more and more people around the world, which is, a lot of people argue that just because something's open source, it's secure. I find this to be a ridiculous argument. I know tons of open source projects out there. In fact, probably most of them that are giant piles of insecure crap. What matters equally to being open source is the code being looked at? Are people auditing it? Are people running it, testing it, using it? Is it widely used and audited? If so, then open source is really, really important. If nobody's using your stuff, then open source doesn't even really matter, to be honest. Open source only matters if your stuff is popular, which is part of the reason why we weren't open source to begin with. We just were like, well, that's kind of a LARP. I mean, sure, could we have been? Yeah. Was it necessary to have a non-commercial license and stuff on our code for a couple of years there? Probably not. But it also was this sort of benign, doesn't really matter in the early days thing because nobody was using our stuff. right? Like you're trusting us completely. Everyone who's installing our OS is completely trusting us, even though the source code is published, even though the source code is completely open source now, you're still trusting us. Very few people on earth have the ability to audit Start OS. And I guarantee you, none of them have to date. So there is an enormous amount of trust being put into Start 9, the development team, right now when it comes to running Start OS. And we don't want that, right? I hate being in that position. I can't wait to get more, recognition and acclaim. I can't wait till competitors start forking our project to compete with us, because it hardens the entire technology and makes it more secure. Bitcoin is secure because it's popular, because people fork it. The less attack surface you have on a given server, the better. So, I have multiple servers, and one of them is running the absolute most mission critical things in my life, and I barely touch it, and I am slow to update it. I have another one that has some kind of, we'll call it mid-level stuff where I create backups, but if, it's not storing private keys, it's not storing indispensable data. And then I have like a test server where I install everything immediately the second it hits the beta registry, and I test and I play and I blow it up and I reflash it and all the rest. So, it's a good strategy to have a few servers in those tiers, I think.
Cool. All right, that's enough of the nerdy stuff. So getting back to having a server in everyone's home, like when you think about that and you work towards that, what's the kind of vision you have, and how far away do you think we are from that? Because it still, to me, seems pretty niche. Like if I spoke to normal friends in normal life about, just, run everything on your own server, forget about iCloud, forget about all this stuff, most of them would just be like, oh, fuck off, mate. Don't be such an idiot.
Yeah, that is the state of the world right now. I'll tell you what, 10 years ago, you'd have no interest. None. I mean, if Start9 was 10 years ago, like Urbit was 20 years ago, Urbit was a server OS with the same essential goal as what we have today. And they came around in, 2002 or 3 or something like that. Now, one, they didn't do it right, in our opinion. Urbit built an entirely new paradigm where application developers would have to come in and build apps for Urbit, which was just never going to happen. That's a, chicken and egg problem. Whereas Start OS doesn't require people to write new apps for Start OS. It accommodates the apps that already exist in the world. Now, they have to be packaged for Start OS, but that is a very different thing than just writing new apps. But they were also just too early, way too early. There was no need. The reason that nobody runs a server is because all your needs are being met in this third-party custodial model of cloud computing. And to date, the consequences of that model have not been apparent enough, costly enough to warrant change. People don't change unless they are in pain. This is sort of true in any endeavor. And so the pain just isn't there. For the most part, people are still just using these third-party SaaS products and cloud services smoothly and without consequence, at least visible consequence. And so expecting people to take seriously the idea of, making a big change is a big change. It's not like just some 1 hour thing. Like totally de-Googling yourself is a major undertaking. And that's just a broad term for, becoming a digital sovereign, opting out of third-party clouds and trusted third parties and intermediaries altogether. Doing that fully it's almost impossible, right? Like I still don't have that, and I build this stuff and I've been doing it for years, and I still have in my life the use of some third-party stuff. Like Start9's own community channel, our primary community channel, is on Telegram. And that's because that's where our customers are. That's where our community is. And, to a degree, we could just say, no, you can't be, we're not going to interact with you unless you use our server. And it's like, okay, well, we're making our job harder at that point. So
yeah,
it can be intimidating. And so nobody's even going to think about it. They're just gonna be like, oh, there's no way I'm doing that. Like, you're crazy. I'm not doing that. So part of our messaging to help people with this is to not pressure themselves to doing it all. You don't have to get a server and then install everything on it and use it for every part of your life. And then next thing you know, 2 days later, you're done with third parties and you're totally free. That's just, it's not a realistic expectation, and people get frustrated and then they give up. And so what I message is I say, look, just start. Okay. Like, we're called Start 9, not Finish 9. You don't have to do it all. Just get a server, select one thing, usually passwords, right? Like, take back your passwords. That's a really great place to start. Get your passwords off of a third-party cloud, get them onto your own server. It's easy. It works really well, right? The Vault Warden self-hosted password manager and Bitwarden client applications are just brilliantly designed. They work flawlessly. And so it's a win. It's a quick, easy, and powerful win. And then just let that sit, like bask in that success of yours for, a month, 2 months, 6 months. I don't care. Just start. And what you'll find is that in time, there will be this urge to keep going when you have a long free weekend or something. Okay, I'm going to take back my photos. Okay, I'm going to take back, my blog hosting site. I'm sick of being charged $50 a month by AWS or Bluehost. I'm going to host my blog. So you can just sort of piecemeal take these things on without pressure. And I think it's a much more realistic approach, sort of like getting fit, like going on a diet or something. It's like, you don't just go cold turkey. You have to be realistic with yourself and wean off of the drug or habit and form new ones over time. And I think, based on my perspective here, like our position in the world and market, that the demand for self-hosting is growing and growing fast. I no longer believe that we are too early. I believe that we are slightly too early, or like slightly before, we'll call it large scale demand, but we are definitely past the total geek hobbyist niche phase in terms of interest. The people actually doing it are still the geeks, hobbyists, early adopters, but we are seeing interest now from very just normal people. They are increasingly becoming aware of the problems, abuses, corruption, and consequences of, broadly speaking, cloud computing. What it means to have third parties intermediating and custodying your entire digital existence. It is starting to become a mainstream awareness. I think we're just in time, to be honest. And I think that the product is nowhere near ready for these larger markets. And when I say nowhere near ready, I'm being a bit hyperbolic. We are closer than people think. As you mentioned, it works. It worked pretty well, and you don't self-define as a super techie person.
Far from it.
And you were able to do it. Yeah, great.
It was simple enough. But and you made a good point, like it's becoming more understood by more people that there are issues, and just simple things like, what is a cloud? Like literally, I think people thought it was something in the sky a few years ago, and people are starting to understand that their data is being used and abused. And like you say, it's niche now. And there are still things, even like for me, that I won't quite touch yet. Like I won't quite touch yet my family photos. To me, that's more precious than Bitcoin. If I lose my pictures of my kids, I'll never forgive myself. And I'm too much of a retard to take that on right now and be comfortable with it. But these are the things where as soon as it becomes more comfortable and I'm like, okay, I've not only got my backup, but I've got a backup of a backup. And then I've got that backed up again. And this is how it works. And I understand it fully. Then I'd be like, well, I don't want to be trusting, any other service keeping these. I want to make sure I have it myself. And so, yeah, I don't think it's a million miles away. And it's just going to be probably the more, obviously I host my Bitcoin stuff because I'm like, I only trust myself to do that. But step by step, there'll be more and more stuff that even someone like me will want to take off the table and get away from these third-party services.
Yeah, my wife and I just did that. I've been building this for years, and only 2 weeks ago did she finally move all of our family photos. We have a couple of children, and we moved them over to our I set up a new server specifically for this purpose
Mm-hmm.
with a big old SSD on it, so that we could do videos and stuff too, and not have to worry about space. And so I set it up,
Mm-hmm.
and we moved it. We downloaded all of our stuff from Google Photos, which is what we had been using previously to do albums for friends and family and all that stuff. Just pretty
Mm-hmm.
standard. And we downloaded it all, and then we uploaded it all to our Nextcloud server over the LAN, which so it was pretty fast. This didn't take that long, and we had quite a few. And then once it was up, I immediately made a backup that
Mm-hmm.
is not stored in the same room as the server.
Yeah.
And then she went to work. She started creating new albums. I mean, it's an endeavor. It was like
Yeah.
this thing we had been wanting to do for a long time, and finally did. But now I have it set up such that if I go anywhere in the world and I take out my phone and I take a picture, it automatically gets, encrypted on my phone and sent over Tor to the server in our home, where it gets added to my inbox of, my photo album, the default place that they get uploaded to.
Mm-hmm.
I can then open up my Nextcloud UI from there using my .onion, or when I get home, I can open it up using the .local and add that photo to an album if I want that is shared with her, so that it automatically shows up on her phone and computer no matter where she is in the world. We can drop photos into shared albums for friends and family and provide them links. And so we're sort of back. We got it all transferred, up and running, and it is super smooth. It's basically identical to the Google Photos experience, especially since all the uploads are happening in the background. You don't even notice the Tor part. So it just works, and it works really well. And we have a backup, and I will make additional backups every so often. But one of the big features that's coming to StartOS, not in this next version, because this next version is largely just a gigantic refactor for the sake of reliability, performance, extensibility, etc. But in the immediate release after this one, as a new feature, we will be adding automated remote encrypted backups as a feature. So you will be able to, instead of plugging in a drive and clicking backup, you'll be able to schedule backups, as many as you want, as many times a day as you want, whatever, to pretty much any target out there. You'll be able to use things like Dropbox or Google Drive, where you could dump your encrypted backups on their servers. You could use, just an FTP server sitting somewhere. You'll be able to use other StartOS servers. So if you have multiple servers in different states, they can automatically back each other up to each other 3 times a day.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. So that's coming. We've already built a decent amount of that. So it's well in the works. And in order to accommodate that, because one of the big changes we made in 0.3.6 that's coming soon too, is that backups sort of had a problem. Backups are a challenging feature in general, because so much can go wrong during the process, and you need to be able to make sure that it ultimately works. Backups are mission critical. They cannot fail. You want them to be encrypted. And then you're dealing with different file systems. So backing up to an external hard drive that you have plugged in is different than backing up to Google Drive or Dropbox or to another StartOS server. These are all different interfaces, and these systems have opinions depending on what file system they're running. And we had a problem in StartOS. We tried to, StartOS currently uses something called Duplicity. Duplicity is a Linux-based backup application that is very opinionated about how it does backups, but does ultimately work. The problem with Duplicity is that it does incremental backups, meaning if you were to create a backup of Nextcloud, and then you were to go in and delete files that you no longer need, and then create another backup, the backup would still contain the deleted files. It only adds new data. So backups just get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Meaning any new file you put into Nextcloud will get backed up. But any file you delete from Nextcloud will not get removed from your backup. And so they just grow. And that's unexpected, because if you delete something from your Nextcloud and then you create a backup, you don't expect it to be there if you were to ever recover from that backup. That is unexpected behavior, in our opinion. But it's how Duplicity works. And so we tried to switch to this backup strategy using a technology called rsync. rsync does differential backups. So it would add anything new and delete anything that was deleted, effectively creating the smallest possible size backup, and a backup that contains only what you would expect it to contain. And it's faster. it's really efficient. Well, the problem is that rsync, depending on the files that are being encrypted, so if you combine rsync with encryption, then oftentimes it will produce file names, and there's no way to avoid this, that are too long for certain file systems like ext4. So if you were to try to back up Nextcloud to your MacBook, the backup may contain file names that are so long that the Mac will just tell you to screw off and the backup will fail. And there's no real way around this, no simple way anyway. So what we did was we just kept duplicity. We were like, okay, well, I guess we can't switch to rsync, even though it's better, because it won't always work. It'll just fail for some people sometimes. And so what we did for 036, what my brilliant co-founder and CTO did was he wrote a new file system module, Fuse module for Linux. He just cooked it up and wrote it, and it uses rsync under the hood to do the efficient differential backups, but it normalizes not only the file names, but the entire format by basically overlaying rsync with a new file system he wrote called startfs. So there's now this thing called startfs. I'm speaking in vague terms about it because I, quite frankly, have not talked to him much about it. This is something he went off and cooked up about 3 weeks ago and showed up and said, well, here's what I did to solve the backup problem. And so anyway, you could ask him and he could tell you every little detail. But it's cool because now backups on StartOS are going to be faster, leaner, and more reliable. And that's all in 036 already, and it's currently in testing. So
very nice. When you and your co-founder started this, did you start it from a Bitcoin perspective of we want to create a node, or did you start it with we want to create a server? Because obviously I found out about Start9 and I was like, okay, it's a node competitor. That's what I thought. Oh, it's a node competitor. And I was like, I'm already running stuff which I'm sort of happy enough with. Like, it's, whatever, I'll, maybe try at some point. But then when I started to see that you were doing more and more and these things were becoming more capable and I could run more stuff on this, it's sort of like my ears started to prick up a little bit. Was that always by design, or was it more of like an evolution?
It began as a Bitcoin endeavor, Bitcoin and Lightning node endeavor. But I also wouldn't call it an evolution towards the reimagining of the internet through a mass proliferation of personal servers that are accessible to normal people and running, replacing cloud services. We went there in about 3 days. It was lightning fast. We as a team, there were 4 co-founders of Start9. There are only 2 of us currently, but 4 originally. And we all came over from a prior company where I was the CTO, and I had a big fallout with the then CEO, and I left. And I had built the engineering team at that company, wonderful people, great engineers, and so I don't want to say took them with me because everyone made their own choice, but it was a mass exodus from that company, and we didn't know what we were going to do. We just knew that we were the best people any of us had ever worked with, and that we could do something special if we just, rolled the dice and took the leap. So
that's cool.
There was a few months where we were doing contract coding for a few different companies just to keep, food on the table. And it was easy stuff and it paid okay. And we were just kind of passively doing this contract work while we, hung out at the common area of my then apartment building every day, which had a pool and everything. So we were basically just kind of brainstorming about what we wanted to do. And we had a few ideas. And ultimately, this is when 2019, when, it was #reckless for the Lightning Network.
Yeah.
And so being who we were, Keegan McClelland, who is now doing protocol development over at Lightning Labs, by the way, he set up his L&D node. And he wanted to play. So he was like, all right, go get it up, go set up your L&D node and we'll test this thing out. We'll put some little Bitcoin on it. We'll play. And I sat down to do that. And about 10 minutes later, called him back and I was like, there's no way. I was like, come on, man. Like, of course I can do this. I'm a developer. I can figure it out. I was like, but it's going to take me all weekend. I was looking at the guide for setting up an L&D node back in 2019. And it was like, I'm an application developer, all right? Meaning I live like 4 layers up in the development stack. I build websites. I build apps. Yes, I can write back-end code as well. Like I'm proficient in a few languages and I'm pretty good. Like I can crush out code. But I'm not formally educated in computer science. I never was at the lower end of the stack in terms of, setting up servers and configuring Docker images. And like, I came in, I'm a self-taught high stack programmer. I use JavaScript and TypeScript and Python, these higher level languages. So anyway, I say that just because I said, okay, I'm a fairly technical person and I can definitely get through this. But if this is what it's going to take to run a Lightning node, nobody's ever going to run a Lightning node. So what's the problem here? I called him, I said, you know more than I do about, low level DevOps and sysadmin and computer science. Like, what's the problem? Why is this so hard? Why can't this be easier? And at the time, Casa, Jameson and Nick over there at Casa had the plug and play Bitcoin node.
Yeah, I remember.
And they had just announced that they were going to add LND to it, that they were going to add Lightning. And I was like, okay, well, here's somebody who's doing it. They're trying to make it easy for people to run a Bitcoin node and a Lightning node without having to go through this command line experience and all the different ways you can screw that up. So we, rather than, our first thought was not to go build something ourselves. It was to call Jameson and Nick and see if they wanted help. Like, hey, this is an interesting problem. We think it's an important problem. So they agreed to meet. We went out for dinner in Denver. It was me, Keegan, Jameson, and Nick. Jameson was the CTO, as he still is, and Nick was their then product manager, and he's now the CEO. And we started asking them questions about their product. Like, well, you're coming out with a Lightning node. It's great. What strategies are you using? What technologies are you using? Do you have plans to generalize this? Because by then we were already talking about this. We were like, well, do you plan to put SMTP servers on there? What about file servers, messaging servers? Like, because by then, as I mentioned, we had already realized that if you could solve the problem of making it easy to not only install and run a Bitcoin and Lightning node, which, by the way, is what most of the other kind of node products solve, is their goal is to get you up and running with a Bitcoin node as quickly, seamlessly, and beautifully as possible, right? It's like, okay, you go from 0 to node in 5 seconds. That's their goal. But we knew that if self-hosting, node operatorship, and all the other things that someone could do was ever going to be a viable, scalable, like realistic paradigm in the world, that getting people up and running was not actually the hard problem. That's an easy problem to solve. It's allowing it to work reliably, even in disaster scenarios. Like, servers are very difficult to own and operate. They're very easy, in fact, to get set up. But what happens when the internet goes out? What happens when the drive fails? What happens when a backup doesn't succeed? What are all the fail safes? And can a normal person, when confronted with these inevitable challenges, do it themselves? Or do they have to, immediately go get their super technical friend to help them again? Because if that's the case, then you haven't solved the problem. You've not solved the self-hosting problem. What you've done is you've tricked people into thinking that you've solved the problem. You've tricked them into thinking that they can do it. But then at the first sign of adversity, they're back to where they were, but now it's worse because they've put their stuff on the server. So now not only can't they do it, but they have to do it because they've become dependent on it to a degree. And so we were like, okay, solving this for real is a serious, serious undertaking. Like, we're trying to codify the entire Linux sysadmin experience into a graphical interface that a normal person can use, and that one that works reliably despite the inevitable challenges and failures that will take place. And we brought this up to Jameson and Nick, and we were like, are you solving that problem? Is that what you guys want to do? Or are you running a Bitcoin node? And not only did they avoid answering us directly, they showed almost no interest in their Bitcoin and Lightning product, the node product. They were like, it was almost like they just didn't want to talk about themselves at dinner. They didn't want to talk about their product. They didn't seem interested in our excitement about what their product could become someday. And we left a little baffled as to like what had just happened, because we were like, well, we have a very talented team of like 5 people just sitting around right now waiting to dig our teeth into something. And we think you're solving a really cool and important problem. Like, do you want help? Are you hiring? Should we build something? Is it open source? Should we fork it? Should we blah, blah, blah? And they were just like dodging, basically. And we found out why a few weeks later, which is that they discontinued the product. They didn't want to tell us at the time because it wasn't public information. I don't think they wanted to leak it, but they weren't interested in their own product and solving the problem that we were interested in solving. And they pivoted the whole company. Their CEO resigned, and they pivoted the company to the multi-sig product that they have today. And it's cool. It's a cool product, do you. That's what they wanted to do, and they're doing it well, and kudos to them. But they abandoned completely the thing that we were interested in. And so we said, okay, well, let's pick it up. We didn't base any of our stuff off of their stuff. As soon as we looked at it, we knew that it was, we'll call it a very, I'm not using this in a derogatory sense. It was a very naive approach to solving the self-hosting problem. In other words, what they had done was they had created, we'll call it a shortcut to getting up and running with a Bitcoin node by creating an extremely opinionated, rigid, hard-coded like product. It's like, oh, you plug this in and Bitcoin, poof. And that means it is massively inflexible. There's like no way what they had designed could ever become the thing that we were imagining. And so we just started from first principles. We just went to the whiteboard and said, okay, well, how do we build a server OS that, one, can do everything that a current Linux OS can do, but do it in such a way that a normal person can competently administer it through thick and thin. And that's the essence of the problem that we set out to solve from day one. I shouldn't say from day one, because again, from day one, it was just me wanting to run my Lightning node easier. But after even a few days of talking, we realized that by solving that problem in a general way, we would actually be solving one of the fundamental problems in all of computing, which is decentralized computing infrastructure, like a decentralized internet. The only way to achieve that is by people running servers. That's it. There is no other way. Anyone who presents we can decentralize the internet or decentralize information and data and all that using software, they're wrong. You can't. You have to have the bricks in the homes. Like, otherwise, everything is running on one machine, and whoever has access to that machine has control over it, power over it. They can, at minimum, turn it off, but usually they have so much more than that. And so we set out to solve the big problem, what we viewed to be the big problem in computing, which is to resist and reverse the current trend towards centralization, which is, in our opinion, a dire, if not existential, threat to a free society in the future.
Was there anyone in that crew of 5, I think you said, who left the previous company? Was there anyone there who was like, guys, what the fuck are you doing with this Bitcoin thing? What are you thinking? This thing's magic internet money is not going to catch on. Or was everyone already involved for a decent length of time, and that you're all just like, yeah, I mean, this is obvious. Bitcoin is the future. We're obviously going to do this.
The latter. We all came from a company that was doing Bitcoin already.
Okay. You're already involved.
Yeah, that's how we met. So, the previous company was Salt Lending.
Was it some sort of... Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it was a BlockFi Unchained competitor. Same as, I think, Celsius. There was a few, it was the crypto lenders. And this was in early 2017, I joined Salt. And I was their first developer hire. I was the first person at Salt who knew how to code. But I did not know much more than that. Like I said, I'm an application developer, but I'm also an entrepreneur and have a long history of management prior to that. And so Sean, the CEO of Salt at the time, brought me on to really build out the engineering department, both from a product architecture and design all the way to hiring more product and engineers to build it. So I was acting CTO. That was not my title at the time, but it was what he hired me to do. And my first hire, I was so lucky. In retrospect, this is just a life-changing moment. My first hire was Keegan McClelland. He was in Denver, had just left Amazon where he was coding. And again, he is a lifetime hacker, totally formally educated in computer science, like, brilliant, brilliant young man. And I hired him, and he really complemented all the things I didn't know. And then together, he helped me vet, more and more engineers. Together, we designed Salt's entire engineering stack, software stack, and product. And to this day, I will tell you that what we built at Salt is very solid. Salt has all sorts of other problems, and it's ultimately why we left. There was all sorts of crazy, not wholesome stuff taking place at that company, and I fought tooth and nail to legitimize their endeavors, and ultimately they were most interested in protecting the non-security nature of their shitcoin and not going to jail, and basically doubling down on all their attempts to, just enrich themselves. And I won't go into details, but I was there to build a lending product. I wanted to provide fiat loans backed by Bitcoin. That was why I was there. And that is not why the co-founders of that company and the CEO were there. So, but well, this was early 2017 too. This was, even at the time, I was buying some of these coins to try to catch pumps and stuff like that. Like, this was before I had not been around for long enough to know the dangers of this. Like, it's a very common Bitcoiner journey of kind of getting into Bitcoin, realizing, oh my God, there's so many other things. Bitcoin's just the beginning, and then you hopefully quickly realize that these are all just affinity scams and come back. But this was my 2017. It was like, oh boy, crypto mania. And Salt was prominent. I mean, boy, I felt very lucky to be at Salt at the time. It was a prominent brand. They had done a huge raise selling Salt tokens, which were supposed to get you discounted lending rates and all sorts of other perks when you use their platform and get loans. And, it was a utility token.
I remember it well because the person who got me involved with Bitcoin is a massive shitcoiner. And he was really into Salt and all these types of things. And I remember him rabbiting on non-stop to me about this in that sort of time. So, I remember it well.
Yeah, well, it didn't work out so well. But at the time, it was a lot of energy. I had the resources to hire anyone I needed. I had the resources to, really anything to build this product. And so I had a ton of freedom, a ton of like creative freedom and power. And I built this wonderful engineering team. Really just it was 15 people by the time I left. And of those 15 were Keegan McClelland, his younger brother, Aiden McClelland, which was funny because when Keegan suggested that we hire his younger brother, I believe Keegan was 22 at the time. He may have been 21. He had already been out of college for 3 years and working for Amazon. And he goes, we should hire my younger brother. He's 19, or maybe, I think he was just about to turn 20. And he had already been out of college for 2 years, and he had been working at Symantec Security out in Palo Alto. And I was like, your younger brother who's graduated college at, 17 or 18 is working in California. And Keegan goes, he goes, yeah, you think I'm a good developer? Wait till you see my brother. He goes, he's better than me. He's a better coder. And I was like, dude, you're like a prodigy. What do you mean better than you? So anyway, we brought Aiden out from California, and here comes this 19-year-old. And from day one, he just, boy, what a monster Aiden is. So we brought him on, and then the last of what would eventually become the founders of Start9 was Aaron Greenspan. He was actually contracting for Start9 through another dev agency. And from the minute I started working with this guy, I was like, oh, we have got to get you here for real. So I went to his dev agency and I was like, what do we have to pay you to like buy out Aaron's contract? So we did. We bought him, and he wanted this, of course. So he came in and got him at Salt, and he was brilliant too. And slowly over the next 2 years, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about Bitcoin. We learned a lot about shitcoins. We learned a lot about finance, building lending products and all that takes. And I mean, at the time, Salt was trying to offer loans backed by all sorts of crypto, right? First it was Litecoin, then it was Ethereum, then it was Doge, then it was Ripple. I mean, they were trying to basically accept any form of crypto as collateral to provide a fiat loan. And we, as a team, and this is a kudos to Salt even at the time, we refused to do a virtual custodial model. Like, we were going to put every last coin that somebody gave us, whether it was Bitcoin or Dogecoin, didn't matter. We were going to put it into a multi-sig address where they could see it. Like, we were not going to rehypothecate. We're not going to do fractional reserve. Like, your coins that you put into custody with Salt are sitting in a window that you can look at, and it's multi-sig, and we can't even move it unless we get like lawyers involved. Like we have a key, the lawyers have a key, and you have a key. And so it was this really kind of, almost high integrity approach to doing crypto-backed lending, except that we were backing the loans with everything under the sun, which is extremely risky because these things are massively volatile, right? And have no liquidity. And so we learned a lot about these chains. I mean, when we were told by the CEO, again, I still was not even CTO until 2019, but when we were told to integrate XRP, Ripple, into the platform such that people could, put up XRP and get a fiat loan, well, we had to go figure out how to run a Ripple node and how to do Ripple transactions and how to store Ripple securely using multisig or some variation thereof, like using Shamir secret sharing or something. And it was a research project. It was like, okay, well, how do we accept XRP as a collateral asset securely? And in the process, we learned firsthand that the entire network was a scam. We were like, we were watching the transactions, right? We had a XRP node up. We had a transaction monitor. We're categorizing them. And what we realized is that everything was fake. All the transactions on the XRP network were faked. They were all like pumping. It was very clear that somebody or a group of people were faking the activity on the network to make it look like it was being used, but it wasn't actually being used.
It was just Brad Garlinghouse and his missus just sat on separate laptops pinging each other.
Yeah, they just had fucking bots set up that were faking network volume. And we were like, oh, this is bad. And it was like impossible to use, right? It took up like terabytes of space and it was clunky and it crashed. We were like, this is horrible software on a fraudulent network. We like went back to the executive team and we're like, guys, you don't want to go anywhere near this thing. And they were like, no, we do, because we have people we have customers that have millions and millions and millions of dollars of XRP and they want to use it to take out loans. So like, we're gonna do it, figure out how to do it. And that was the beginning of the end, so to speak, where there were now these ideological and very practical too, just limitations that we were unwilling to compromise on as a team. And slowly it became increasingly apparent that we were going to have to leave. But during that time, Salt founders were infighting quite a bit because the original founders of Salt were a real estate guy, a restaurant manager, a creative designer, and a lawyer, a bankruptcy lawyer. Those were the founders of Salt. That was their prior careers and skill sets. And they had stumbled onto the shitcoin scene and basically hit it at exactly the right time. And next thing you knew, these four people who didn't know each other before this, they had all met at a couple meetups and bars, suddenly had, after the Bitcoin pump of 2017, had like $70 million in the bank amongst four founders with equal power who didn't know each other. And so all hell broke loose, man. It was like one assassination after another. Like the CEO got ousted, then another CEO got ousted. The board turned over 6 times. It was like a war zone for the Bitcoin. Everyone was just trying to secure the control over the money. And now I don't want to be overly aggressive. There's a couple of these people that were well intended, and just found themselves in a very difficult situation. And there were a couple who were not so well intended. But anyway, through the chaos and the executions, I'll call them, like people getting wiped out left and right, I just ended up running the company. I ended up as the CTO. There were 80 people at the company, and I was running the operation on a day-to-day basis. I basically was the owner operator of Salt, or I shouldn't say owner, but the operator of Salt. There was a token CEO who lived in Mauritius on the other side of the world, who really had no idea about anything. He was the bankruptcy lawyer. The bankruptcy lawyer ended up in the CEO seat. No, should be no shock there. But he had no idea what the company was doing or how it did it. So I was running it out of Denver. But like I said, he was insistent on this, endless legitimization of the Salt token and accepting shitcoins and all sorts of rehypothecation that he wanted to get into. Oh, did you know we could take all the borrowers' collateral and go shove it on exchanges and gamble with it, type of stuff? And I'm like, oh my God, you are not gonna win. So yeah, I left, and Keegan and Aiden and Aaron, and then shortly thereafter, Lucy and Drew and Blue Jay, we all left and became Start9. Ultimately, 7 engineers from Salt were at one time or another at Start9. There's currently only 3 of those 7 left, including Aaron and Keegan, who both moved on in a very, we'll call it mutually agreed upon way. And Keegan is tearing it up over at Lightning Labs right now. He's doing great things over there with Olalu on L&D.
Well, it sounds like quite a ride.
Yeah, that was probably more information than you asked for, but there you go.
No, it's good. I'm glad, although it sounds extremely stressful, I'm glad it happened that way and you met the people that you did, because, as I said to you before, like, I love running Start9. I'm really happy with it. It's exciting for me to see all this stuff happening and groups of people who care about Bitcoin making it easier for the non-technicals like me, and more people who listen to this show have started reaching out and joining and jumping on because we're talking about it a lot, and it's been cool to get to know you a little bit, and I'm very excited to see what you guys keep doing.
Yeah, I appreciate the interest and the support and the compliments. Really, it's so rewarding to be doing something that you think is important and difficult. I know it's difficult. I think it's important. I know it's difficult, and to bust your ass on it for coming up on 5 years now. And really kind of finally, I mean, we've always had people that recognized and supported us, but really in the last few months, we've broken through some kind of inflection point of awareness. And it's been really, really rewarding to have not just people, but good people, like people that I respect, the right kind of partners and fighters, I guess, approach me and just be like, hey, like, good job. Like, we're, appreciate what you're doing. Keep going at it. It's super rewarding, so thanks.
My pleasure. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. We'll keep talking about you, and I look forward to all these updates and bits and pieces. But yeah, it's been cool to get to know you, and appreciate you coming on the show, mate.
Yeah, for sure. It might be worthwhile to get another one on the books, because we didn't get into it at all, but part of what we were talking about earlier around the networking and just privacy and security and remote access and all that is such a complex and difficult problem that we realized we couldn't solve it all in StartOS, that ultimately there are greater forces at work here, like your ISPs, for instance. They can see quite a bit. But the next logical step for us was to give users greater control over their networking, including stuff that could not be done directly through StartOS, like the rest of their home and stuff like that. So at Bitcoin 2024 last week, announced very quietly to only people who came by the booth, and we demonstrated our new router product. So Start9 is coming out with a router. We expect it to be ready in the first half of next year. I know that's a broad time frame, but I prefer to be broad when it comes to software.
Yeah.
First half of next year, we will be releasing the router. We are currently accepting donations and contributions that will also get you a router, from the first batch. So we're crowdfunding the router efforts. Every last piece of software that we are writing for this router is MIT open source. So we're writing it and giving it away. That's why we're running a crowdfund for it too.
Nice.
And it is going to be 100% open source all the way down through firmware. So it will run our custom flavor of OpenWRT, which we're calling Start WRT. It runs core boot firmware, meaning the firmware on the device has no closed source drivers for any of the hardware. And we are disabling Intel's management engine in firmware. It is a device, but it's also an open source router OS that people will be able to flash to their existing, in many cases, to their existing routers. But also, if they just want to grab a mini PC that accommodates a couple antenna, then they could just go get that and flash our router OS Start WRT on that as well. And the sort of high level claim, and we shouldn't dig into this now because I think our time is up, but the high level claim of the router is that it is just as powerful as the most powerful router you've ever encountered. It has all the features that any power user could ever want in a router, but it is completely accessible and usable, not in full, right? Because if it's an incredibly, esoteric, rarely used power feature, we're not going to put it front and center in our GUI. But our custom GUI for OpenWRT, we think strikes the right balance, the best balance, because we evaluated a lot of routers as we set about to do this. And it's why we did it, because as we evaluated routers, we realized that they all suck. They're all very complicated and difficult to understand and use. And so we set out to build a router that struck the proper balance between power, like features, and accessibility, right? Intuitiveness, usability by a user, while also allowing those who do need that extra little bit of power that 99.99% of people won't need can still do via a secondary advanced GUI or via the command line if they feel competent there. So it's sort of a device all the way for a normal person who just wants a very secure, open source, easy to use router, all the way to somebody who is a, advanced networking engineer that needs the full power of OpenWRT. Our router will accommodate both of those users equally well. And the reason we did this is not just because we felt like building a router. It's because Start OS cannot on its own solve networking problems that exist outside of it, right? Inherently, that's just an inherent truth. It is the router, the server is within a larger network, always. No matter where the server is placed, it is always on a LAN. There's always a WAN to the server's LAN. And so what we realized is that to solve the sovereign computing problem doesn't just require us to design a new kind of server. It also requires us to design a new kind of router, because the router is the creator of, guardian of, and traffic controller of the network. And so we had to enter that space eventually. And now was the time, because we're blowing the door open on all these advanced networking options. So the Start9 router will plug and play, integrate with the Start9 server, meaning if you have an OpenWRT router at all, any OpenWRT router, it doesn't need to be our flavor of it, then your Start9 server will be able to connect to it. You'll simply go into your router settings and paste in the public key of your server. And from then on, your server can effectively take over the router. It can manage the router remotely, which means you'll be able to go into your server and say very simple things like, I want my Bitcoin RPC to be on bitcoinrpc.matthill.dev, and click save. And the server will then prompt you and say, StartOS would like to make the following changes to your router. It's going to forward this port. It's going to create this firewall rule. It's going to list the things that it wants to do in order to comply with your command. And you'll click OK. And then it will change those settings in your router, and you'll be hosting on ClearNet in the safest way possible, without needing to go into your router settings and do all these advanced configurations. So it, for us, was a very logical next step and product. And from a business perspective, it's also, a way for us to keep bringing new products to market and hopefully funding ourselves so that we're not, struggling for resources and donations. We are a business. We are a good business, but, doing good things, but we do need more products and more customers. So the router is a great way for us to do that. It's win-win-win across the board.
Very exciting. Let's get something booked in. Until then, it's been good to chat to you. I appreciate you and what the team are doing. So thanks again.
You as well. Thanks.
I really hope you enjoyed that. It was a pleasure speaking to Matt, and it's been a pleasure running Start 9. If you haven't already checked them out, it's worth having a look at. If anyone has any questions, you can reach out and ask me. And they have a very useful Telegram chat group. Thanks again to everyone who's been supporting the show. I really do appreciate it. Every time you share this with friends or family, make clips, send in sats, send in messages, and all the other things that people are doing, it really does make a difference. If you haven't already checked out what we're doing with our clothing, articles, and everything else, go to ungovernablemisfits.com. Catch you on the next one.